cannot see the monitor now, you probably won't see it for the entire show, so you might want to move over to your left a little.
Hello and welcome to the Robert Jordan's Notes panel. Thank you all for joining us. We were a little bit crowded last year, so we decided to move in here this year so we'd have a little bit more room. For those of you who don't know, a couple of years ago after JordanCon, me and Marie Curie from Very Then went to Charleston to the College of Charleston, the Addlestone Library, Special Collections Department, and we spent a whole week digging through Robert Jordan's notes. And the first day we got there, we realized that we could scan pretty much anything in the collection, which we thought was kind of strange. I mean, we weren't complaining, right? But we sent a message to Team Jordan and said, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but we can scan pretty much everything here. So that wasn't exactly what they had in mind. So for the rest of the week, and the head of the Special Collections Department kind of negotiated some more restrictions on the collections. By the time it came to Friday, we couldn't scan anymore. But we got away with all this stuff. So I figure since all of you come to JordanCon or the hardest of the hardcore, that every year we could share a little bit with you. Now I'm going to ask you kindly not to record anything that you see on the screen. The only guy who's allowed to record video is right over there. You can record audio, we don't care about that, but don't point the cameras at the screen because what we're going to show you is copyrighted material. And mostly we're going to be doing talking about what we've seen in the notes. Everybody who's up here at the table has read everything that we got away with from the library. So, or maybe not every single little thing, but they've all seen what I've got. So these are all trustworthy folks. If you don't know, see, I'm the least trustworthy person up here, but everybody else was a beta reader for Brandon's books.
We had to find someone up here who would be willing to take the fall and then do the scanning. So that was Theresa.
Yeah, that's me. I did the dirty work, so here we are. Does anybody else want to talk?
Yeah, you guys all know us, but just for those who may not, my name is Jason Denzel. I run DragonMount.com and do some other things too.
And I am Minze Taglieri, and I run the 13th Depository blog, and also do a few other things.
Matt Hatch and Theresa.
And other things.
I'm Therese, and I'm also from Theoryland, but I'm nobody important in Theoryland. Here, I am the director of the World of the Wheel Track.
So one of the thoughts is, what did we cover last year? So do you care?
No, we can cover the same things again because we might not have the same people here. Obviously, we want to hit some of the highlights, but how about we start out with, I think the newest person to the notes is Jason. So how about we start with Jason, and Jason can tell us some of his favorite things.
Yeah, okay, so Therese invited me to, we'd been talking about so many things that were in the notes, and I kept going to her and saying, like, hey, is this in the notes, and what about this? And she would say, oh yeah, did you know that Jim said, or Jordan said, you know, the following about whatever, demanded or whatever? And I said, no. I said, well, yeah, it's right here in the notes. I should show this sometime. And so it took us, you know, a year or so, but finally she sent them to me and invited me to be on this panel. And so I have spent the last couple of weeks reviewing, because it takes that long to review even the remnant of the remnant of his notes. It still takes a week to get through it. Like I planned originally to have it on my iPad here. I'm gonna have it on my iPad just for local handy portability, but it's way too big. It's like, they're just PDFs, but it's something like, what, 12 gigs? Is that how big it is?
Yeah, I don't know.
12,
It's a
13
lot.
gigs, 14
I don't
gigs.
remember.
I don't have the space on my iPad.
And keep in mind that I didn't get everything.
Yeah.
I just got like what we concentrated on, knowing that we only had a week, we concentrated on things that were relevant to the plot, to world building and stuff like that. Well, we didn't, the library has drafts of every book, like several different versions sometimes, and we didn't scan any of that. And there was like a 1,000-page ICI file that we were sending for last. We were going to do that on Friday, and then they wouldn't let us scan anymore. But I think most of that ended up actually in the companion.
One of the things that was really fascinating to me is that having become a published writer in recent years, and every day going deep into my own worlds and my own projects, I've established my own way of writing and note-taking and world-building and everything, and then I go and get a glimpse into Robert Jordan's methods, if you can call that, but it's fascinating. All of his notes are like long-form prose. Like even his notes, he's using detailed, beautiful adjectives. And meanwhile, I've got an Excel sheet for taking notes on some things. It's such a vastly different method than I was used to. But I noticed, maybe this would be a good segue to bring it with some of the first files, that a lot of things are repeated. And what I mean by that, like when he describes, let's say, the Age of Legends, or the first age that came before the Age of Legends, a little bit of nugget, the tiny 2 paragraphs of nuggets that we have, he wrote it 6 or 7 times, and each time he added a little portion to it, like the story of Len going to the moon, which is just a one line in Eye of the World. He mentions it, and maybe he spells it with Len with L-E-N, goes to the moon, and it's just that, Len went to the moon in the first age or something. And then the next time we see it, he mentions again, he's changed the spelling to L-E-N-N, and he elaborates it's Len, and it's Salah, his daughter, who flew in the belly. And so he's expanding it each time. So it went from 3 sentences to 5 to 6, to whatever. But my point is that we have, for so many things, repeated information that I don't think he copy and pasted it, because it's rewritten slightly differently each time. It's almost as if I'm trying to imagine, how did this come about? And I can imagine sitting down and just, maybe to get his brain warmed up and going and everything, there was an Age of Legends, and in this Age of Legends, in the time before the first, he would start writing it out long form, and he'd write the entire history leading up to, I was about to say Spring Rise. That's from my own book. What's the name of it? Winter Night. Yeah, thank you. I'm in my own world right now. So, but it's almost like he writes a 3,000 word warm up just to get to chapter 1 of book 1, and he does that over and over. Do you have those? I don't know what the names of the files are, but can we bring some of those and show them maybe the one instance or 2 instances of when we saw Len and...
While they're looking, let me give you an example that somebody will like. At least I did. I'm a minutia geek, so I like these little kind of nuggets that we find. For example, an example of what Jason was saying, Sangreal and Angreal were originally in his notes called Crease, or it was C-R-I-S was the name of them. And what you'll notice in this is they went from Crease, and then the next file that's pretty much exactly the same, now he uses Sangreal. Then he went to Angreal, because clearly he was like, maybe Sangreal is a little bit too much. Something, his thought process was, we're just going to say Angreal. And then the 4th version of the same document uses Sangreal and Angreal. So it's fun to kind of see the evolution of the idea and the naming. So not just what the things would do, but also the naming of the things. And these files, like Jason was saying, they would sometimes, you would see an answer or a story or a concept evolve to what we know it's going to be, but then it devolved. to something back where he had it before. And then, so for another example of this would be Tam, which, by the way, Tam, Matrim, right? Mat and Matrim. He has Tam and Tantrum is the
Yes.
I was like,
It's eye-watering.
okay, that was, okay, Tantrum. That makes some sense.
Yes. I think it's in this very well. Let me have a
Well, you can see right there, just the very first sentence.
It's Rhys,
Rhys
not
Althor.
So he was more Celtic originally, if you like, with the name for Rand.
Before Shatan, we had,
Yeah, it was.
I think it was just Shatan.
It was another name even before that, because this is the oldest version that I could find of the story. And the dark one was called Saka, as in like almost like Sakana. So yeah.
So yeah, here's an example. Tam was going to die,
Yes, that's true.
and then he was going to live,
Yeah.
but then he was going to die.
Yeah.
And that's how the story ends. It's so interesting because you read this and you realize, and the reason why you know that that's changed is there's other pieces of the writing that have changed. So the story is modified, but then he goes with the Tam dying version. And then he's built out the story even more, but then he goes with the Tam living version. And what you notice is when Tam lives, the plot line changes. When Tam dies, the concept was they were all going to go straight to Tarvalon. With
right.
even
That's
more
right.
Edmund Fielders than there went. Like a group, or like a large group, it seems like it's described. And they were going to go to Tarvalon, and a lot of things were going to happen there, and then they were going to make their way to the Eye. And that was the Tam dying version. So this is, when you read the notes, that's why it's really tough, because there's some kind of, you feel like you're reading the same thing, and what you're looking for is literally just a change of a sentence, as it was in Minutia Geek, right? You're just like, wait, what is he going to change? What is he going to change next? And those are the type of little things that do change.
Yeah. Robert Jordan was sort of like an accretionary writer in the sense that, you know, the story would roll and it would pick up more and more and more detail, and then sometimes it sort of flipped over, and that would roll up, and the trouble roll into more and more detail. But the trouble is, there's always that risk that if you do that, that you're not going to be consistent. And they must have had fun editing him, because he would have had remnants of ideas that he'd abandoned. And you have to purge them all out once he's gone off on a different storyline. So that's why we do occasionally see blips that represented an earlier idea that he's actually abandoned. The wisdom was originally, Nynaeve was originally an old woman, and he split them into Mistress Baron and Nynaeve. And this is, in this very first version, the old wisdom, which was Mistress Baron was still alive then, says it's too late to help Tam, and much to the distress of Rhys, as it was then, and Rand later. So, and you know, Nynaeve isn't there, and Lan is quite elvish, if you like. He's they were called warriors, and they were wardens instead of warders. Moraine's name, as you might know, was spelt differently there, and the wardens were that were down to power wielders. They were called. They too lived for a long time and looked young, except for the eyes, so they were ageless. So that's a huge change.
If you guys ever hear the story about how, like, if you look at the book cover of The Eye of the World and you count the number of people that are leaving Emmons Field, there's one extra, in that painting, and that was because when they were developing them, that was still where the story was at that point, and so.
Now, if you've ever wondered if Robert Jordan ever changed anything because of your feedback, this was always a fan kind of concern, right? Did it ever happen? And I found evidence. This is the fun stuff, right? Is going to look for because I'm still looking for answers to arguments.
He still really thinks that Avienda.
Stop it.
Lanfear didn't die, not in Matt's world.
Not in my world. If you remember the viewing, I think it's Matt has the spear, right? He's kind of snarling, and there's Robert Jordan mentions that one in the notes and says, consensus seems to be that what's happened has fulfilled this, and for purposes of space and time, I'll just drop it. I read that, I was like, wait, no, write in the notes what it was going to be.
It's
not there, unfortunately. Yeah, so is it a view, is it a Minze?
No, parents.
Is it parents?
I think so. He sees in the dream world in the window a Matt being naked and bound with his ashandra between his
Yeah, and he's
elbow
snarling.
and his
His
arm.
snarling.
Tied behind his back, he's snarling, he's
And so
naked.
it's hooked his arm so he's helpless and yet he's bound.
And so fans assumed that what we saw happen
Yeah.
in the books
As
answered that viewing, if you will, or whatever.
Time, him and time.
Yeah, and so Robert Jordan seems to be saying in the notes,
It's going to be
like, that was going to be something else.
Another example is the white hot iron.
Yes.
Originally, Rand was going to get captured and tortured by Morgaz, or however you pronounce it, Morgaz. How do you pronounce it? I don't know. Anyway, he was going to get captured and tortured or something there, and like she was going to end up being his lover or something like that. And I don't know. It's like really complicated and not anything resembling what actually happened in the end, which was really tame and boring. But yeah, apparently, I mean, it wasn't boring. We all loved it, right? But in comparison, it was not nearly as lurid. That's for sure.
Well, the full thing with that is Elaine was going to be the one who, her name was Aranel. But Elaine, Arnell becomes Elaine in the books, was going to be the one that actually
Tortured him.
Yeah, she had to do this, not because she wanted
There
to.
were like
she
a few
fought
different
for it.
versions of this, though.
Yeah,
you
there
know,
are.
because-
There were. It was, and I think, yes, originally Morgase was going to be Rand's lover, but then they evolved to that she was the mother of the character who eventually became Elaine, which is what we have now. But Rand's mother was Morgase's sister, which would have made he and Elaine cousins. And so I think that
Very Arthurian, right?
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
Arthurian.
it's basically, he started out following Arthurian myth very closely, and then he began to mix much more other stuff
Yeah,
in and diverge. And when Morgase and Rand became lovers, Galad got very bitter and jealous, and he basically turned to the Dark One, which is like the complete opposite.
But kind of what we all thought it should be, right? Let's be honest. No, it does seem like he left some viewings and some prophecies in about things that he thought about doing, but never did. But he left them in the books. Like some of the things about Rand becoming a beggar and all these other things. Like Rand was literally, after his eyes were going to be taken, and he loses his hand.
And he got tortured and all that.
He was going to leave and be out there pretty much, like all this other stuff was going to be happening.
And then he was going to come back and win the last
Yeah,
battle,
and then-
immediately.
And then somehow he's going to be out there kind of wandering, and he's going to still feel like he had to win, and so he's going to go to Shalagol and beat the Dark One. So completely disconnected from everybody else after he had been tortured by Elaine, in essence. It's like, it feels like a very alternate, I almost feel like there's like a Silmarillion kind of thing. There's like this alternate universe of stories that we can all imagine once we have the facts. And then you can kind of run with it, and it's
maybe it's what actually happened, but Robert Jordan just, things have become myth over time, so this is just his interpretation of it. But
Well, I think it was an if world thing, if you
Yes,
like.
Heidi.
Yeah, and there were the books.
Question? Yes.
Did you guys say last year, I can't remember if this is true or not, but just you were talking about things that got changed because of fan theories, that Mazrim
Yes,
Taim
was
originally
Congress,
supposed to be Dena
and
and
Taim and Dread killed Asmodean,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
originally.
So I
Duh.
can just make that up in my head.
Yeah,
Okay.
make it up. Yeah.
No, you didn't make that up.
Well, yeah, why don't we expand on that a little bit, because I know that's pretty much what everyone here really is here for. Who really,
Can you bring up that file number? Hold on just a second. There are actually two files that spell this out. The first one is
Oh, hang on, I'll close
people in box 55.
that. Okay, people.
Yeah, and
Box
look at page
55.
There it is.
Page 15. Page 15 of that file.
Okay.
As your baby girl was like, slow down.
The Midnight Asmodean is in a different file.
Therese, the question I heard people asking is, how many boxes were there?
There you are, up the top.
A lot of the boxes have drafts.
I can't read
Oh, look at page 15, Linda.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly what we all thought. Yeah, that's the.
Oh, can you make your file smaller?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. Like, everyone's as big and that's smaller.
Okay, will show up claiming.
Or read it.
Oh, that's not the
He will show up claiming to be Majentine, taking advantage of Rand's amnesty. Has that hurt anyone's brain yet?
Yeah. So, because Shara was originally quite different.
I love it. No.
Yeah, so Shara was originally a land of stewards, so it was like it was more like something out of Tolkien rather than the very Chinese/African nation that it became.
And what's the one that talks about
The Asmodean one is in box 55, the Rand file.
this one doesn't make
Wait a second. No. Yeah, this is a different one. No, that's not the Asmodean bit, sorry.
Okay.
Box 55, naive, page 19 is Asmodean.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about these. You think that the name of the file or whatever is going to have, there's so many things. You just have to know the names.
Yeah, but like the naive file is just about her plotline.
And
This particular part is just saying that she doesn't know that Demandra had killed Asmodean.
Yeah, see, little things like that fall in where you're like, why would that be a
There we
name?
are. Yeah. There we go.
So, yeah, page 19 of that.
Now, I'm gonna, just for a second, going back to the Demandra thing, I'm gonna push back a little bit on the notion that it was fan change. Clearly, we have evidence here that at one point, Robert Jordan made that connection, and as readers, many of us, including myself, intuitively assume that, oh, hey, Luce Theron is screaming to kill this guy, and they both have the hawk nose, and they both never smile and everything, so it's clearly the same person kind of put it together. But it could just be legitimately that it wasn't necessarily fan pressure, but that the story evolved, and it wasn't that some fans have speculated that, because everyone guessed it and everyone emailed him or whatever, he emailed them and sent letters and he heard about this and he was like, well, screw you,
It's too
no,
obvious.
it isn't, and I'm gonna make this work another way. Or it just could have been that he had a better idea.
Well,
that came
one
along,
thing that kind of makes me doubt that, I mean, some people said, I think Brandon in particular said that he might have changed it based on characterization, like he didn't think it fit Demandra's character.
Yeah.
But there's like basically no hint in any of the notes that I've looked at that he had Demandra and Shara. Like, he didn't write any notes about it. I'm not saying that wasn't in his head and wasn't the plan and what he passed on to Brandon. Because you have to keep in mind, whatever notes he gave directly to his successor, who he didn't know who it was going to be, those were not in the library. So we don't know anything about the notes that Brandon got, aside from this stuff. He got all of that, but what he looked at basically was the notes that were for the last book. And we haven't seen those. But in the notes, like these notes go all the way up to his preparation for Knife of Dreams. So they go up pretty late. And really,
There's
this
nothing
preparation
in
for
there.
the book following too, there's nothing about Shara. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that he had this great idea for Demandra to be in Shara. If he changed his mind, it was for another reason, presumably.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that the better idea was.
Oh, it's just
Shara.
clear.
The better idea being that, like you said, he could develop Mazrim Taim as an individual character distinct from Demandra and ran with Taim as his own character.
Yeah, I think the only evidence we have that fan, like I said, that's what I was looking for. It wasn't the Taim stuff. It was where Robert Jordan in his notes actually said, that's that viewing of Matt, where he actually does say, okay, and it doesn't sound like it was because of fans. It just sounds, he said, because of space and time, right? What he intended, he just didn't have enough time or space to do it, and this was sufficient, it seemed like, to, where he didn't feel like, it fulfills it, it's close, it's done, and let's move on. So
I don't know what he had in mind for the white hot iron, though. I mean, that just kind of fell by the wayside.
And isn't it funny that Robert Jordan is trying to keep things slim and trim and efficient? So there's a question back here.
When RJ was taking his plot and shifting it from one direction to the other. Did he talk through this with people, or did he just sit back and noodle it out in his head and go, I'm going to this direction?
I would have thought that both things happened. I would have thought.
You have to talk directly into it. It senses when you go away.
I would have thought that both things happened. He's done some sketching out on paper. You can sort of see that evolution in the notes. But other times there's a sudden jump, and that's where I would expect that he's either sat there and thought, or else he's spoken to people as well. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
This person right here.
And you use the word consensus, seems to be, and you maybe that means to your fans, but that could just mean like the people that he's talked to about it, like the editors and the people that.
It could be. He did receive a lot of letters from fans too, so it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't have been included in that concept. But yes, I mean the editors and you're right, Maria and Alan and such.
From what I've spoken to Harriet and to Maria and Alan about this topic a few times, just because I've been curious to see like how much he did share with them. And Harriet, as she always does, put it in the most pithy perfect way, and she said he shared some things with us. You know, that's all she would say. But the impression I get is that by and large he was a lone wolf with this stuff, and that Harriet, as you can tell, she has always been very careful about what we see behind the curtain. You know what I mean? With how things operate at Team Jordan. That's why these notes don't usually get out there. Love them to death, but there's a reason they're not in the room here talking about these notes too. You know, and that a lot of it I think came from Jim. He was very like in public. You know, I'm sitting in the writer's track room. If you guys have been spending any time in there, and other authors have been saying, rightly so, that he very publicly would say, "I am the Old Testament God. My characters do what I want them to." You know, and many writers, myself included, are a little more loosey-goosey on like, "Oh yeah, my character wants to go over there, so I'm going to let them go over there." You know, but he's like, "No, they do."
That was dumb.
But then again, that might be what he is saying, and that might be true, but also we can see from the notes here that he did his own iteration. I think that writing it out in paper is how he thought, and that's why we have this is his thought process.
Yeah, so remember these notes are not new canon, right? Like these notes are literally things that came before, so that's how you should kind of take these in many ways. In other words, technically, right, we're told in the books, Grendel was the killer. Now, those of us geeks that care about this stuff will never accept it beyond the nose. But anyway, it's fine, but it's not canon. So, I mean, and I'm sure you're here to get a little bit more kind of the nitty gritty. You know, for example, what did you think about Moraine? Was her eventual future? You know, a lot of times he wrote Moraine was going to become the Amarillan, right? So in the notes, that was kind of a thought process. No, he didn't. She didn't, right? She should. Yeah, right. Exactly. But she didn't. So he often split out things in the notes. He kind of gave a lot of either talents or things one person was going to do. And this is really common that I've read so far, which is he then splits them into 2 or 3 different people. And, you know, just like things that happen to Rand and things that happen to all these individuals. I liked, for example, the Ogier. Oh my gosh, this is like my favorite thing. I was reading through. The Ogier started off as what I never saw, which is so obvious now, and it really ticks me off. It started off, they're dwarves. And I didn't see that. Like, it wasn't so obvious to me, but they are. In the notes, it's like completely clear. They started off as short, stocky people living in a side.
I think I have it right here, Matt. I don't.
Do you have that
one?
one?
One of the ones I marked here on my iPad.
Yes, so I mean,
I know how to get into my iPad.
each one of them is in, one of them's in White Goddess, but he goes in more detail later.
There are like 10 White Goddess files.
Yeah.
Which one?
28.
I said folder 1 because I don't have folder 1. Yeah, sorry. No, I don't, Theresa.
So either way, I can tell you, as I wrote it down, they're ogre mountain people, short and stocky. Now, it was in the White Goddess file, and that seems to be like the initial one he went on.
Yeah.
They practice ritual cannibalism, men have long beards. And so I mean, right, so he starts off with this like pretty typical kind of dwarvish like idea. And then throughout he started changing it. So then they got tall. So they were short, stocky, living on the side of mountains in like 3, if you will, like steadings. Then they got tall, and then they were kind of like, they were objects of the One Power at one point, so they were like the Green Men and others, like Trolloc, you know, but then they lost that. Then then he doesn't show in the notes, but they eventually come from a different world. They get tall, they become more peace-loving in general, other than obviously the one with Sean. But so he modifies it in such a way that I never anticipated dwarves. I don't know why, I should have, right? Like when you think about it, you're like, oh wait, they're kind of nose,
stonemasons.
Yes, they work with, but yeah, as soon as they go, but what do they talk about? They have more of a natural connection to the world. You're like, shoot, I should have said dwarves. But I didn't. And that was like kind of the brilliance of that.
The original spelling was O-G-Y-R.
Yeah.
So that makes it more ogre-like.
Yeah.
The many of his early ideas, as well as being really quite tied to Arthurian myth, were also tied to Tolkien and the typical fantasy tropes of the time that he was actually developing the ideas, which would have been in the 80s. So it was very much originally a book of the 80s, and then he developed it amazingly into something much better and quite different.
Defined the next generation.
Exactly. So,
Were you able to figure out how far in advance he was writing the entire story, or was it really truly a trilogy, yes, he initially discussed?
Well, it depends on what you mean about the entire story, because he had the ending basically as we saw it from the very beginning.
exactly. With very similar wording.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up just real quick to get it out there and then we can discuss on it. Can you kind of figure out in the notes the place where he started really getting famous more for this story, going to have answering questions, a little more public in regards to the interactions? And when did the reader find out sort of who did all of that? Because that is
Well, keep in mind that his fame kind of began with the internet. Because it wasn't until people started getting on the internet, sharing their signing reports and stuff like that, that he really became aware of his fame. And at that point, he was just finishing up his 6-book contract. That's when he started to slow down because he didn't have to put out a book a year anymore. That's when he lost his buffer zone because he had written ahead. You know, he was working on book 3 in 1989. Book 1 didn't even come out until around that time. So he lost the buffer zone. And that's when his notes started to branch out and get more detailed. They weren't really formative anymore. They were more about, okay, what are these characters doing? Who all is with them? And he started writing individual biographies for people, especially the Aes Sedai. Started keeping track of their strengths so he'd know who defers to who. Stuff like that started around book 6. And you can really tell that's where the dividing line was. But keep in mind, like, as far as him changing major plot points, this isn't all ancient history. You know, some of it is, you can go back into his earliest notes from before any of the books were published and, you know, all this ancient history that we're talking about. And then there's stuff from the later notes, like even as far up as when he was working on Crossroads of Twilight, when Egwene was supposed to get pregnant, and she was going to be pregnant with Gawain's child when Gawain died, and that goes back to some foreshadowing he put way back in book 3 about the Honorland Seed marrying the Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks, because Galad was supposed to take care of her, you know, and you know that obviously didn't happen, but there's other more recent things that were changed either by him or by Brandon. Like, I'm sure that it was actually RJ that changed Sheriam. She wasn't Black Aja for a while, and then she was. And you can see where that changes in his notes. It was him who made that change. I can be pretty sure about that. Other things were changed more recently. Like, I think with Sheriam, once he wrote that scene in The Dragon Reborn with the Gray Man, he was like, he kind of kept it on the table as to whether or not she could be Black Aja, and then eventually he decided that she was. But for, you know, until he made that decision, he treated her as if she wasn't in the notes. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
I am talking about some of the earliest of things that didn't change. Big spoilers for Memory of Light. We're all good here, but just, you know, this is a chance you don't want the whole series ruined, the climax of the series here. But it is in one of the oldest documents in there. It straight up says that the last battle is a confrontation between Rand and the Dark One, and it's about free will, and it's about the nature that Rand wants to kill, you know, the Dark One outright, and that's what he's going for, but then he realizes that he shouldn't because that will destroy the free will of men, and that's what this is all about. And so it is spelled out there. It's clearly that's where, you know, there are some terms used almost directly, and like, I'm sure Brennan was looking right at that document as he's, you know, writing out the last battle. And so, but it's in there. And I think that's in one of the documents that's called, you know, Notes on Books 1 through 6.
Actually, it's 2 through 6.
2 through 6, that's
Yeah,
right,
because
that's
I
right.
actually
Because
looked at it myself.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
2 through
put out
6. This is a fascinating document, by the way.
It is.
There was
There's so much good stuff in there.
when they went to the Eye of the World, Egwene or Nynaeve was going to be raped by the Dark One.
There was a lot of rape in these early versions of the story.
And not only that, then somehow that was going to break that person into, like, he had this metaphysical thing where it was going to break them into a spiritual, mental, and then they couldn't be healed. But then Rand, like, going to sleep and then healing somebody while he slept. See, it's so interesting to kind of, like, this concept, little things that end up in the actual books, like, they had the root, but in a really strange way. Like, he heals Egwene in one version when she is raped by the Dark One. He heals her while he's sleeping because they're like holding hands. You know, it's like it's really like. And then they wake up and they're like, "Who's this? Oh, it's the Dragon Reborn," and then runs away.
And some of this stuff survived, like, in really small ways. Like, for example, Nynaeve was attacked by Agenor at the Eye of the World.
Yes.
And that was originally supposed to be very rapey, but it wasn't. But then in her accepted test, she's being chased around by Agenor, and it's really creepy. And you can kind of see the traces there of what he originally had in mind, you know, but he toned it down very much for us, for which we should all be grateful.
Yeah,
He had an editor who very wisely said,
Nynaeve was going to be transplanted, so she was going to die. She was going to be one of the Dark Ones, and she was going to come back and tell everybody, "I didn't die. I was healed." And then she was going to be kind of almost an agent of the Dark One. And this is around the same time Moraine was going to become Amarillen's seed. So she was going to come to Moraine. There was going to be, so it's really, but again, if you think about it, Nynaeve does retain this really important thread, and it's kind of counter Moraine for a while. And so, again, what we got, you get these threads, and you're like, okay, you kept this piece. And in almost every situation, I haven't done necessarily, I'm saying almost, kind of give myself, well, maybe I'll find something. But in almost every situation, I really like what came afterwards and not what was there originally. And I'm like, that would have been a really strange take. Maybe the alternate version of Matt in some other worlds, like, that new version was stupid. You know, the old version's awesome. But no, it's really interesting what he did and the threads that he kept. Kind of, because I think they all strike us, like, that would have been a really strange, like, scene. Like, Nynaeve gets raped by the Dark One, and then Rand heals her, and that's how he discovers he's the Dragon Reborn, but then she gets taken by the Dark One and transmigrated and fights with Moraine. It's very, I don't know, it's very strange. It's a very strange book. So.
Like, in my imagination, like, Harriet made him read some book on, you know, the tendency of men to use rape as a plot device or something like that. It's like, here, you need to read this.
But, you know, interestingly, we do have in the book 7 where Moghedien is raped by
there's more guys too, gets,
Yeah.
you know, basically raped by Robin, you know.
Yeah.
So it's still there, obviously, and that was a plot device because that's how Galad became Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks, because it made him so mad that he killed Alda. Oh, that was a different rape, sorry. There was like a long training for warning. Anyway.
I've heard in the library there's a really early novel of his that he said will like never be released.
Yeah.
Did you guys see that at all while you were there?
It's there, but I wasn't particularly interested in it, so I didn't spend any time on it. Linda and I are going back there this week, but there's so much Wheel of Time stuff to look at that I really doubt that we'll bother.
It's far more worth our time
Yeah.
to look into the notes. We've sort of got our own short lists.
I mean, he said it deserved to stay in his closet, so I'm sure it's like, if you want to see examples of him being a bad writer, just go read something like the Fallon books.
Probably gonna want to read them.
Okay, so stepping away from the rape stuff, here's some interesting stuff. So the Forsaken, I'm gonna give you some names, some sample names. These are fun. It's in
Blue has
the
a question
Forsaken
again.
28.
You have a question again, Blue?
No, yeah.
No, I want to pick on you about the Fallon books. The Fallon books were just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, now,
Read them out.
for what they are, the Fallon books are, and in
Well,
fact,
like in terms of the relationships and the rapey stuff, you know, and I don't know, he wasn't very good at writing
So who would you imagine were
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Who would you imagine were Forsaken names that remained the same? Some of them were Ishmael and Lanfear, but he had Dea, Moloch, Bealdred, Malador, Maleficent, Sharain, Savantar, and Damon Dread, which obviously becomes Damon Dread. So yeah, that was his list of 13 were not, I mean, clearly went through, obviously Lanfear and Agenor, Balthamel and Ishmael.
Was there one named Evilus?
We had a sort of a semi-Disney one, and we've got a couple more swipes from the Bible.
Yep.
As well.
Yeah, there's a really interesting little piece. It's like these number of spokes on the wheel and number of ages. He went, you know, this wasn't like a.
It was 9 at one point, I think.
Yeah, 9. The spokes on the wheel, he was like, at one point he wrote, considered 4, 5, 7, 9, and 13. You know, he said he couldn't decide which was the number he wanted to stay with. Yeah, so there were 9 or 7 ages.
The dark one won in the ones that are gone, he burned off those folks. We just skipped them.
Oh,
That's more a matter of symbolism, him trying to work out which way he's going to go with that sort of symbolism.
Originally, the dark one was like an alien from another world who like came in, and he was just basically, you know, like.
No, it sounds like a Sanderson thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Question.
Did you find any interesting notes about the Black Tower? That's always an interesting topic to me, and I was wondering if there was.
I didn't get through all of them. I saw one file or two, but I didn't read anything.
I think I saw some things in there, but
Here we are. Hang on.
Linda's bringing up.
59 or let's see which one's bigger.
But and these are going to be like Theresa was saying. As Theresa was saying, you know, the nature of the notes changed around book 6, which is when the Black Tower obviously comes into play. So most of the stuff that you're going to see in the Black Tower, at least that I saw, isn't necessarily was about. There weren't a lot of sweeping changes. It's just more notes attracting.
Yeah, it wasn't about his plans for the plot or his, you know, the story behind the story or anything interesting like that. It would be just list of people and maybe a mention of their talents.
I've got a list up there. You can see Mishrael.
Mm-hmm.
Can you make that any larger?
yeah, we can't read
Yeah, so it's a list of people. For example, one in the middle, and the second to the bottom one, a
Can you
bulky
make
man.
it full screen and get rid of that sidebar?
Get rid of the sidebar. Oh, the little arrow right there. Oh, there's a touch screen. It worked.
I've had this a month, so I'm not
Oh,
used
okay,
to
got
all
it.
of
So you can make it larger
Yeah, so-
now without losing any text. You can just zoom in.
Oh, cool. So a bald-headed man with a long grizzled beard and leering blue eyes, 5'11", Ashaman wears a sword. So yeah.
There's stuff like this in every file when it comes to the later stuff, like past book 6. Like a Perrin file, for example, would have a list of all the people who were with Perrin, where they're from, their nationality, what they look like, how old they are maybe, you know, just little details like that. Maybe a little bit about their history if you're lucky.
See what just said there on the screen, right? Mazin Tayyip and Crow.
Did you ever wonder why after Lanfear or whatever her name was at the beginning bored a hole to the prison, that it took about 5 years before the Dark One really started to kind of take over. Like I always wondered, like that's a long time. I mean, maybe it was a small.
Actually, in the final canon, it was over 100 years.
It was almost
For it to start, for them to, because I think he goes over after, I think Ishmael goes after 5 years after the war.
Yeah.
He fled this one.
Yeah, they had to go find it. But yeah, they called it the collapse, and it took about 100 years.
Yeah. In the notes, it talks about how they actually did not think, like in the notes he writes, they think that they've touched the creator. And there was excitement, like they actually believed like this thing that they had touched was actually something good. In other words, like you kind of imagine, because the scene is right, like Shaman Dome, it's like there's like destruction and people are dying, and you're like, man, that was the beginning of the Dark One. No, you're like, no, afterwards they kind of thought like, well, at least in his notes, he kind of planned for them to think this might have been something good. And it took a while for the Dark One to taint things and for people to kind of catch up on like, wait, this thing isn't actually something good. And that kind of added some clarity, at least to me, like why there's this kind of timing and what they actually found, because it almost seems like they kept on going, like researching it, contacting, touching this thing, using, in other words, like there wasn't this destruction and all of a sudden it's a bad person. Like they thought they touched the creator. So that was kind of cool.
Lag is always a danger, I guess.
So here's some other cool stuff I found, if you would like to hear it. So the medallion that Matt's wearing, one of the planned things was, or at least one of the things in the notes was that if it was a channeler that was wearing it, they could force anyone that was channeling at them into an involuntary link. In essence, almost like taking them over, right? It was a very dangerous. I mean, for Matt to hold it wasn't as dangerous as it would be if you were channeling against somebody that was actually a channeler that had that medallion. So kind of like these little kind of things that never came up in the books necessarily about the object, but some things that were in his notes that was kind of, I thought that was kind of unique. That would have been kind of fun to have seen that happen. You guys have anything else that you saw in the notes that you thought was kind of interesting that we haven't touched?
What do you want to
Yeah. Well, in wasn't there a scene where Elaine was attacked by some black sisters when she had the medallion? Or was that that was a copy of it. Maybe.
That was one of the copies.
Okay, never mind.
Cancel that.
Chris?
Is there anything in the notes about Sangreal other than the children Cal and Calendor? There's always that issue of.
Well, there's also the fluted rod, Sangreal, and there are a few item lists.
I think I didn't see it because I haven't got through all the notes that are here yet, so I haven't seen anything. But I remember when I think Brandon said on a panel one year here, someone had asked a similar question, and I think he said that they went and found a list of every object of the power that Jim had listed. They'd come up with his notes, and they found the ones that said, "Oh, I'll use that one, and I'll use that one, and oh, that's the big one I'm going to give to."
For example, all of Catswain's ornaments were listed in the notes. And there were like 3 different places where that list was found, and some lists were more complete than others.
Well, the thrust of the question, I guess, is about Saccharum and whether Jordan always intended, it's always ambiguous to me when they talk about Calendor and that it being one of the most powerful and there's only 1 or 2 more powerful, or it's always ambiguous.
Oh, you're talking about the mysterious one that was more powerful than Calendor,
Right.
aside from I didn't see anything on that. I was never entirely sure that wasn't a mistake, and then he was referring to the one that also the Sidar version, even though it specifically said that a man can use. But no, I never saw anything on that. I haven't scoured the notes looking for it, but I never saw anything on it.
I do have something of interest about Calendor and the Sangreal in general. An early idea he had, which I think he kept a fair while, was that Calendor had the ability to sort of force a link to both the Great Tsar and Rial through access keys. So at one point he considered keeping at least one of each access key, so that scene could perhaps take place at Sheol Gul, but obviously he went a different way ultimately. Yeah.
Go ahead.
How about the snakes and foxes? Anything else on the snakes and foxes and the Tower of
There's a little bit. Most of what is in there, I think Brandon used, or RJ used, because he actually wrote most of that Tower of Genji segment. So there's not much in there that didn't actually make it into the books. There are a few little tidbits that probably have to sort out one day exactly what wasn't revealed in the books. But I don't think there's anything like really earth-shattering aside from what did make it into the books.
Yeah, the only thing I saw that was of interest, if you kind of want to look into what the basis of it was, is he had one of those said Iothian and the elephant, and then he put pixies and fairies. So whatever you want to take from that, like from a conceptual standpoint, that was the root with where he began to kind of create those. But yeah, he had this elephant, and then pixies, fairies.
So that would be sort of folktale elves. That would be folktale elves instead of like Tolkien type elves.
Question here?
Yeah, so you mentioned cats a lot. I'm just curious, since she doesn't show up in the first few books, when did it become clear, if the notes say, that she was going to be so central to the resolution of the story?
I don't know about her centrality, but her name was mentioned in the earliest book notes, like the very earliest notes, and it was originally spelled with a K, Catswain. So, I mean, he obviously had some plan to introduce her, but, not every important character has to be introduced in the beginning, so that was one of the ones that he kept on the back burner. I don't think there's anything, like, really specific as to his plans for her in the early stuff, but the character name, at least, was on his mind before The Eye of the World was published.
Yeah, she, Catswain, from a narrative point of view, and the story structure was that, with Moraine gone, which was a great sacrifice and, and really worked well dramatically, but then it left this void because she was the one who explained the world to us in the early books. She explained it to the Two Rivers folks, and, and it's natural for the Two Rivers folk and Rand especially outgrew Moraine, and so that's kind of why she couldn't have this final sacrifice, and it helped them. It's all kind of classic stuff. But then there was this void of like, well, who else is going to be that guide and be that mentor? And it couldn't be Moraine anymore because the type of help she was giving was going necessary. So I can see that from a writing point of view. He's got in the back of his mind, like, I've got this character Catswain, and I can use her at some point, and I'm going to bring her in when I need it. And oh, hey, look, it's book 5, or book 6 and 7. She comes in 6, right? And 7, that's right. Yeah, and so there's this void, and it's a perfect time to bring it in. She is basically replacing Moraine's function, just in a new, escalated, hardcore kind of way. And I think that it was that thinking that ultimately, against spoilers, led her to be the one that, in his notes, he very distinctly says, she is the one who becomes the first Amerlin of the Fourth Age, and I don't know. I've always kind of thought narratively that it should have been Moraine to take on that role at the very, very, very end. But
I still think Moraine should have been Queen of Carian.
Should have been what?
Queen of Carian.
That too.
Here's some more. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Bella was in.
I think he just winged it on that.
No, I think Bella was mentioned pretty early on, isn't she? And I thought there was a note about even when there was still Rhys Althor, there's a note about that, maybe not named Bella, but there's a specific. He makes reference to a reliable shaggy mare or something.
Yeah. Is Bella one of the names for the Forsaken?
For the Dark One? Yeah, Bella, aka Evilist.
Bella Aldrid.
Bella Aldrid.
I was just going to mention, Bella's a dark friend. They clarified that in the notes.
She's not a dark friend, she's the dark one.
So one of these
important distinction.
One of the interesting things, Pat and Fame was not I mean, a peddler was mentioned. Actually, there wasn't, if I remember correctly, the first one I read, the peddler did not exist. Then the peddler showed up. And then the peddler's name was Edward White. He dies, like at the attack, and then he goes missing. And then he goes missing and he's following them. And it's just it's one of those where you're like, oh, you can tell he really started liking this peddler character.
Yeah, he always called Patent Fate his wild card character. And one of the things that we argued about on the forums was that that time loop trap that Rand got caught in The Great Hunt when they were chasing after Patent Fane, who had escaped. So they're looking for him, and Rand goes in his house, and he gets caught in the scene where he watches over and over again the same family eating, and then somebody breaks in and murders him, right? And gets stuck in it. And the way he describes it, like a spider web being around his head that he had to like claw off, always sounded like Weaves of the Power to me, and I thought it was Lampier. But apparently he told several people at a book signing that it was Patent Fane that laid that trap. But I think what he was doing at the time was developing in his mind what he wanted Patent Fane's powers to be, and he developed that over the course of several books. But in his original notes, it was Lampier that laid that trap.
Yeah, you can tell again, it's that whole thing that finally becomes canon is whatever he ends up writing. And a lot of these things were not at the beginning.
So, two follow-up questions to that. Does he say anything about the purpose of that trap? Because it's always been unclear. And then the other follow-up would be Fane, Shadowlogith. Is there anything?
Sorry, let me answer the first one first. Lampier's purpose, I think, was to get him to channel. Because he would have had to channel to get that trap off of him. Sorry, what was the next question?
Going back to Fane or Shadowlogith in general, just that to me that always felt like the plot line that didn't really go anywhere.
In the end?
Yeah.
I like the way that one ended, but I guess I'm a weirdo. I like the whole Matt being immune to the, I actually predicted that, so I guess that's why I like it.
And
that was one of the things I was writing on.
And we don't know, there's so much that we don't know collectively about, like, in those last 3 books of, what Brandon wrote, and what came from Brandon's imagination, and, he, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, Harriet likes to keep the man behind the curtain, and that's one of the ways she's very adamant that she does not want, in general, it to be revealed, like, who came up with what. But you read enough Brandon Sanderson, right? You get a feel for some of this stuff, and this is a personal thing, this is not official, this just personally, I think that a lot of the Fane stuff in those last books may have come more from Brandon. It's just, it has the way that the powers, that Fane uses powers, and evolved them and got to kind of crazy levels. It has a Brandon kind of
vibe.
Yes, aura to it. And so, but
I agree. Sorry. I agree, and also the text itself is there's more of Brandon's expressions in it than Jordan's.
And also, Brandon actually talked a lot about Harriet's directions for how he should write that scene,
So, but going off of that, that, remember, that Robert Jordan, he intentionally left things where things were not supposed to be answered. So it may have been that Fane, I'm speculating, and maybe Fane, was the thing that he would have figured out when he got there.
Right, exactly. And that's why he called Fane his wild card character. He was somebody that he could use in Last Battle to make things interesting, and he could, brainstorm along the way how he was going to do that. But he would, he was just a wild card to keep, in his hand so that he could.
He was originally intended to show up and bite off Rand's finger and fall into the pit of doom.
There was also, he also had the idea that perhaps Fane and Slayer were both at Sheol Gul, and they each intending to kill Rand, but they end up killing each other instead.
There's a couple of quick ones that are kind of fun. Galad was Land's son. Moraine could have tested the boys for the 1 power.
Galad could channel at one point.
Galad becomes a channeler, but only after the taint's cleansed.
Yeah.
There's Loyal's name, this is my favorite, is Jacques Vladad. It's so awesome. I mean, can't make this stuff up. It's so great. Say it one more time. Jacques Vlabat or something like
Yes,
that.
that's do not try this at home.
I just want to have a recording of Matt saying the name. That's all.
Okay, we're really short on time here, but one more question here.
So speaking of Slayer, is there more detail about the ISAM loop kind of melding merging
No,
that process?
not at
That
all.
was really
When we looked, that was one of the first things we looked for. The Slayer file is really short and disappointing.
Yeah.
So it was apparently all in his head. So yeah, it's that time. We have to call this to an end, unfortunately. But we're gonna do this every year.
Until we wreck them all.